Yes. We are now live.
Okay, I am calling to order the Finance and Administration Committee meeting of the Board of Directors of Marin Water for May 27th, 2021. We're going to wait just a minute to give everybody a chance to get assembled. And we are expecting Director Schmidt. Is that what we heard?
We haven't heard that we aren't.
Oh, okay. Well, it is slightly past our time for starting, so maybe we'll just go ahead and take the roll.
Yeah, that's the best.
Okay, so starting, Director Bregman. Oh, sorry. Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Russell.
Here.
And President Kohler.
Here. So I am looking for a motion to approve, to approve the agenda.
I'm sorry, Terry, did you want to note, I think that Director Schmidt just joined, so maybe we can include him in the roll call if we want to.
Oh, okay. Director Schmidt,
Sorry
are you
about that.
present, sir?
I am present. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Good to see you, Monty. Okay, so I am looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Do we want to modify the agenda, President Cole?
Right, as modified by the removal of item 3 for the near term.
Move approval of the agenda as modified.
Second.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. So now is the moment for public comment on any item that is not on the agenda. Terry, do we have any public comments?
We do not.
Okay. Then we are moving to the regular calendar, and I am looking for a motion to approve the minutes of the last Finance and Administration Committee meeting of the Board of Directors, which occurred on April 22nd.
Move approval of the minutes from the April 22nd meeting.
Second.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
President Kohler.
Aye. That brings us to item 2, which is the proposed operating and capital budget for fiscal years 22 and 23.
Okay, I'll start and then hand over to Chuck. Good morning, President Kohler, board members. Chuck McBride, our CFO, is going to be reviewing the tweaks we made to the budget based on the last presentation we provided to the board at our most recent board meeting. Specifically, he'll be sharing the increases we made to the conservation program and how we propose to do that. Going forward, I did want to share that staff's going to be working with some outside resources for support to fully understand the benefits and the processes to capitalize conservation rebates, incentives, and the like in the conservation program. And staff intends to bring to the board a review of this opportunity, which may fit into 10-year planning efforts. And also, the board may want to, once we bring this and have the discussion, consider changes to this adopted budget, which, obviously we'll be able to do if the board's inclined. And, that will align with other changes we may need to do going forward. As you know, the revenues, we are projecting a shortfall, and staff is in discussions about ways we may be able to tighten our belt going forward to reflect the decrease in revenue. So I'd expect post-adoption ongoing discussions, whether on conservation or overall revenue going forward. So with that, I'll hand this over to Chuck to go through his slides.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning, President Kohler, members of the board. I actually, as Ben mentioned, have abridged this presentation quite a bit from what you've seen in the previous two workshops and the board meeting. So very quickly here, this is just a snapshot of our revenue forecast for the next fiscal year. And you can see that we have $111.4 million that we're expecting in revenues. Most of that's coming from water sales, about 53%. We've got those service charges are at about 20.17%. And then the other big chunk that we have there is the capital maintenance fee. And then you have smaller pieces of the budget there with watershed fees and fire flow. And then other revenues, which are things like late payment charge, interest that we receive on our portfolio, and things that don't fit well into these other categories. And then on the expenditure side, we have $114.8 million in projected expenditures. And just keep in mind, I know the expenditures are a little higher than the revenues, but that's primarily due to timing differences in our capital inflows and outflows as we are now on pay-go with the capital maintenance fee. And you can see that most of the budget, about $88.7 million of that 114.8 is in operating, and operating is all those things that you think of to operate the district: personnel costs, general and administration, maintenance and supplies. And then the other big chunk there is capital projects. That's about $25 million or 17.7%. And those are for the capital projects that are outlined within the proposed budget that's attached in your in the staff report there. And then we have this other smaller piece, which is capital purchases. And capital purchases are just those things like fleet vehicles and computer equipment that we have to buy. And then we have the fire flow portion out here, 4% of the budget. So now we'll talk about the changes that Ben had alluded to. So essentially what we did, this is a snapshot of page 11 in your attachment, the proposed budget. And page 11 just gives you a high-level view of the district in its entirety and a breakdown of all of the costs by these major objects. So this is your conservation line, and we look at what the 2021 budget was, which is the year that we're in, the 22 proposed budget and the 23 proposed budget. Just as a quick aside here, it looks like in our initial projection, like the budget was going down. What we did down here below is take that 443,500 from the current budget and kind of explain how this reduces to a baseline budget. So we actually transferred funds out of here into professional services, and that's just because I think it was one of the rebate plans was contracted out. So that money is still within the conservation cost center. It's just not within the conservation line item. And then we had a water efficiency master plan that was budgeted for, that was one-time funds that were put in the 21 budget. So that comes out in the next year. So that takes you down to a baseline budget of $324,000. And then we had proposed $331,000 in the first year of the biennial budget and $341,000 in the second year. What we've done here very simply is added in $250,000 in conservation in both years of the biennial budget. So that brings that up to a revised budget of $581,000 and $591,000 respectively. And then the next thing that I wanted to show the board was how we did that. So we had think back to the previous meetings, we said that we basically had a status quo budget. We know that we're entering challenging financial times, but we were able to do a couple things. One of those things was we put a lake algae study in there, $250,000. So we took that out of the budget and put that towards conservation. None of these that I'm presenting here say that means that project is permanently gone. This just means that we will reassess it at a later time, and we may do it in the following budget, or if we have additional funds in the second year of this budget, that's something that can be brought back in. And then in the second year, if you remember, we had part of the budget proposal was to add 2 rangers, one in the first year of the biennial budget, and then the second year of the biennial budget. So what we did here was we took out the ranger in the second year, and that saved us $187,000. Then we took funding that we had for this Sewell Mercury study, And so we took some money out of water quality studies to balance that out to $250,000. So that's how we attained that money. The Ranger, the thinking is that would probably come in the following year. So again, it wouldn't be, it's not removed, it's deferred. So at this point, that is, these are the only adjustments that we made to the proposed budget in your attachment. And I think you have an attachment that updates page 11 and shows you what that looks like with this additional $250,000 per year in the budget.
Chuck, on that deferred Ranger, when would that second Ranger be coming on board on this plan?
So I could take that, Chuck.
Okay.
The thought, Director Gibson, is we bring in the first Ranger and make changes to assignments and duties and focus on some of the areas the board's been talking about. And then the next budget cycle, we would bring back the additional Ranger, and is probably a benefit because it does give us time to integrate the first Ranger and identify where the opportunity is to fit in the next one. So I don't think we really lose too much ground by doing this, and we do free up these resources.
Okay, and by next cycle, you mean 24, 25 budget?
Right, that's correct.
Mhm. Okay.
I believe you're on mute, President Kohler.
So I'm just talking to myself. Is that what you're saying?
Again,
Thank you.
I was trying to read lips, but
No, that's not part of your job description. Sorry about that, everybody. So what I was saying was that Chuck and Ben and I and some other staff have had conversations about how we can free up money for the conservation budget, which is really very, very small part of our overall spending, which I think to me and a number of you, my fellow board members, seems incongruous in light of what we're asking our public to do and in light of our communications that we are there to support the public. So we do need to be able to put real money into conservation and water use efficiency measures if we're going to reap those water supply and drought resilience benefits. So the challenge, as you've seen from this presentation, is that by limiting ourselves to the operations budget, we're making very difficult trade-offs. So the conversation that I think the board needs to have very soon, and I think Ben alluded to this, that this will be coming to the board in a relatively short amount of time, is to really think about the extent to which we can move these expenses into capital. And you guys all know this is something I've talked about for a while, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it today, but to really bookmark what seems to me to be the key point, which is that conservation expenses, for the most part, are not annual expenses. We don't change out our toilets every year. We don't change out our turf every year. We don't put in gray water systems. These are long-term investments in the same way that other capital projects are. The difference is that they are on private properties. So from my perspective, GASB has now made it clear that those things can be booked as long-term expenses and are eligible to be debt financed. For lots of good reasons, management is bringing in some outside support to clarify that and to seek that path. So it certainly doesn't mean that we have to issue bonds that only do this or that all of our capital needs to go in this direction. It's really a matter of figuring out that balance between the needs that we have, and we've gone through those a lot for to enhance and maintain our more conventional infrastructure. But it's really time, particularly given the severity of the drought, for us to be thinking of conservation as infrastructure as well. So I just want to put that bookmark there.
Thank you for continuing to pursue that. I agree with you, and I think it's. I'm glad to hear that we're going to be looking into it in greater depth and bringing in some other expertise so that we can figure out how to do that right. But it sounds like a move that we should be moving. I would agree that it's a direction we should be moving, and do it well and do it quickly, though, because time is not on our side.
Now is the time.
Okay, any other board comment on this item before I go to public comment? Okay, Terry, any public comment on this item?
There are none.
Okay, then I think this is an approval item.
Okay, I'll move approval.
Oops, second.
Director, excuse me, Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. With that, we are moving on to item 4, since item 3 has been removed from the agenda, the monthly financial update.
Okay, and this is a review of the April financial data that we have. So stepping our way through the fiscal year here. We're looking pretty good so far, as we'll show you. There we go. Okay, so as always, we'll start with our revenues. So if we're stepping through in a linear fashion, we'd be 83.3% fiscal year. So it's just a reference point, so you can kind of see how we're doing. So water revenues, we're 86.2% of budget, $71.1 million. Most of that's water sales, and you can see that in I believe the first attachment to this item. And you also have service charges in there of $17 million and watershed management fee of $3.8 million that comprises that $71.1 million. And then other revenues, those are things like rents and grants that don't fit well into these other categories, are $2.5 million or 71.1% of budget. So overall, with operating revenues, we're 85.6% of budget, a little bit ahead of that linear benchmark. And then we have the fire flow fee jumped up in April because we got the second remittance from the county of the property taxes. So that came up to $4.3 million. We'll probably have some lesser amounts that will flow in during the last months of the fiscal year. But that normally matches perfectly with the budget by the time the fiscal year is done. And then we have capital revenues there. That's primarily CMF, capital maintenance fee, at $13.5 million or 76.5% of budget. So when we put all revenues together, we're 84.5 million, 84.5% of budget compared to that 83.3% benchmark. And then we've broken this down by revenue source, so we can kind of account for the timing here. This probably becomes, less useful as we start to move toward the end of the fiscal year. Now that we've got everything through April booked, but we're about 4% ahead just on water sales alone. And then that service charge component, we're about 2% ahead of budget through April. And then the watershed fee is at 96% through April. And again, that will likely be exactly at 100% by the time we get to June 30th. As always, we show you the water sales comparison. Looking back, this is in dollars and thousands compared to the prior fiscal year. And you can see how we've been tracking throughout the year. We were ahead in December, and then we dropped in January. And we've just kind of been tracking pretty close to what last year was. Our March water sales actually dropped a little compared to the previous March. And then in April, we see a bit of a drop there also with the current year compared to the prior year.
Can I ask a quick question on that? I thought we've been seeing that production for April this year was above last year and higher than the prior, but and this might be an educational moment for myself. How are our sales lower if our production was higher than last year?
And that is a great question, because in a few slides here, I'll show you the AMI data, which is more real time, but that's exactly what we're seeing in the AMI data. What we show you here, Director Schmidt, it's kind of lagging. So we have that 60-day look back for receipts. So this actually would kind of lag real experience. It's not real time. That's why we started including that AMI data. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the AMI data. We're seeing actually an increase in usage. Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is the comparison by category. And you can see the increases over the previous fiscal year. These are interesting because now you're starting to see, we're comparing months where we were actually had entered the COVID pandemic last year in March. So now you're kind of seeing a comparison to, to a comparable period. So here we see that we have an increase in sales of about 7.5% in the single family portion. But then you can see in commercial and industrial here, you can see that we've dropped down by about 18%. Down by about $168,000. So when we kind of combine all of these categories together and we look at what our total sales are, we're an increase of about 2% compared to the previous April. And then we've been showing you what the aging looks like. So this is by category, starting with those bills that are 30 days past due. And again, this is in dollars and thousands. So that's, again, comparing to last April 2020, we are seeing a slight increase there of 81,000. And that trend continues out through the 60, 90, and out to 1 year category. So when we total those all up, we've got an increase about $1.9 million there in total aging increases. And then we take a portion of that. We just take this 60-day line and we kind of dissect that to see what that one's looking like. And here you can see, single family residential, that's crept up as last April. But then some of these other categories, duplex and business institutional, are down a little bit. Recycled fire line is down. So in total, we're just in that category. We're up about 10% just in the 60-day past due category. And just as a kind of a point of reference, that translates into about $1.8 million for all past due receivables. And as of April 2020, if we look back 1 year, that was about $200,000. That's what we've seen since we've entered the event, is that we've seen a big spike in what the bad debt expense is looking like. And then here we show you our tier consumption looking back to 2015, so you can just kind of see how consumption dropped in 15, in 16, 17 there, and then has come back to hit those 2015 levels again, and actually past the level that we were in 2015. And as I always point out to you, about 75% of our water consumption is in that first tier. And if you add the first two tiers together, tier 1 and 2, you're over 90% in those two tiers. Very little usage in tier 3 and tier 4. Mm-hmm. And then as Director Schmidt had asked earlier, when we actually take those 1,178 meters that we have in the for single family in Tiburon Belvedere area, and this gives us a little more real-time data. Now you can see this green line is the current year, and you can see there that's actually a pretty marked increase over last April. That's about a 15% increase there. But in March we actually saw about a 13% reduction. In February we actually had about a 24% reduction in usage compared to the previous years. But now we're getting where we have 3 years of data, so you can kind of look back. This blue line is 2019 for residential, so you're starting to get a little broader picture of what this looks like. But yeah, when we look at the real-time data that we get from AMI, we've definitely seen some increase in usage, at least in this in this limited area of the service area. Mm-hmm. And then we also do the same thing. This is a much smaller sample size. These are 84 meters, and this is institutional business meters throughout the service area that we get data on. And this kind of shows the same picture. You can see that we had some reductions there in February and March, but then when you hit April there, just as a by scale, this is a little bit over 20% increase compared to the previous April. And I think
Chuck, could you go back one if you have a, if you have a, so I'm wondering if this AMI data, if it's for Tiburon and Belvedere, does that AMI data reflect our overall district well? I mean, as a sample.
I'll share. I say a couple things. One, these, we call them kind of right shoulder months, are very influenced by weather. So, you know, in April, this was a drier April than last year, but it was a bit of a wetter March and February. So as we move into the summer, that weather variability starts to normalize, and we'll really be able to see what savings we're getting directly from conservation. In response to your question, it's a data point. It's a pretty sizable data point, but you know, I think every community does have its unique characteristics, and I think it'd be hard to say it's really representative broadly. But as an update of where we are system-wide, we're looking at the weekly usages, and we're going to go into far more detail Tuesday night at our drought update. But we're at system-wide for this last week at a 4% reduction. So we had been tracking more around 10, maybe 12% on a weekly basis. And this last week it was 4%. So it certainly is concerning and not what we've been planning and expecting for and working towards, but we'll have detailed discussions about that on Tuesday night.
Also, if I can add to Monty's question, because I think it's a really good one. When we have looked at the different levels of water use at the same time throughout various parts of our county, our district, it varied dramatically because we've identified a number of different climate zones, literally, in the district. And at the same time of year, you would often have very dramatic different uses in water. So I don't think there's any reliability on what's going on in Tiburon and Belvedere to the district as a whole.
Great,
I'm
thank
not
you.
so sure about that, Jack. The only difference I could think of offhand is we might be a little foggier in the morning. So, you know, maybe a little cooler, but I would think that the biggest impact is likely the size of the yard, that I think people are still watering at this point.
Yeah, well, I think size of the yard is also very much a factor, but that varies throughout the district as well. Yeah,
Sure, but you know, logically, we've got some pretty good sized yards here in Tiburon.
yeah, that's
And,
what I'm saying. Yeah, I think they're perhaps larger there than in a lot of other areas.
I agree. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I think that was
Yeah.
where my question was driving at, is that it is where we have AMI data and I get the real-time benefit of being able, but that as a sample size, it may not represent the average of our district,
Right.
but rather maybe skewed toward larger landscapes where there may be greater consumption that we're seeing and might explain some of the increase.
And also less price sensitivity. So, you know, that's an issue too. Chuck, could you update this graph next week so we could see what the May data looks like, or as soon as you can? And, you know, let's see if our messaging is getting out, because I think this was ahead of our messaging. I think, you know, maybe not fully ahead, but partially ahead at least. So maybe we can see if we're getting people's attention.
Yeah,
Let me see what we can do,
can-
Director Russell. It does take us some time to pull this data, but let me see what we can do.
Yeah, well, you know, we ain't making clocks, so it is when it is.
It is your reference, your clock making reference. You're 4 for
Yes,
4.
yeah, keeping up every week.
I'm paying attention, Larry. Hey, but you know, I wonder whether, and I don't mean to create meaningless work, but you know, as we try to get outreach to around the drought and the need to conserve, I'm wondering whether it helps to try to break out our district usage comparisons so that we can maybe see where we need more targeted outreach. if we're going to, if we're seeing a good conservation response in one part of our district, maybe we decrease some focus there. And, if we're not seeing at all a good response or a much less one in others, we maybe, again, obviously focus more effort there. I don't know if that would be useful.
That's a great idea. Chuck, the other thing, while you're counting out those numbers, I would be very interested in seeing the number of tier 4s that we're seeing in the peninsula on the AMIs in particular, being that's on the ones we really have. If we still got people in tier 4, then we clearly aren't getting the message to them.
Okay.
We know that there's some tier 4s that are just price inelastic and message resistant. So
Yeah,
we're never
of
going to
course,
get all
of
of
course,
them.
of
But
course.
yeah, it would be great to see. Right. I think we talked about that a little bit last week. I think some of us were asking, if we even have that many left in tier 4. I thought we'd done a pretty good job bringing that down in the last drought, but I'm sure that things pop
I
back
don't know.
up a
I
bit.
think there's still 1,000, Cynthia, that I remember.
Oh, that
but
many?
I think so.
That would be useful to bring forward if the staff
Here we
could do
go.
that. I
Here
know
we
it's
go.
small.
This is CCF, so this isn't customers, but this gives you an idea. You've got about, front of my eyes over this, about 8,000 CCF there total. If my quick math is doing it, you've got about 200 of that is in. So that's what, about 2.5% of the totals in tier 4 there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going up.
Going up, yeah, that's a critical part.
Well, that goes along with what Ben
These
said.
bands are pretty. Yeah, I don't know if it's going up because this overall bar is a little bit bigger. So this looks, it's up by 4 CCF compared to 196.
Yeah, it's not going up, right. It's not going
Yeah,
up.
I mean, that's probably about, without putting a calculator to it, it looks like it's about exactly the same proportion.
Yeah,
I'm
and
just
keep in
looking over
mind-
past years though, since from 2015 on up, I know that you can normalize for sales and for consumption, but it's, I would bet even still you'd see a higher in the last 2 years.
If you go back 2015, you're right. Yeah, that does look like it's up a bit.
Well, I think it goes along with what Ben said, which is, it's the shoulder period, it's dry,
Right.
and, they're using water. I mean, that's obvious. And the more bucks you got invested in landscaping, the more likely you are to use the water. It seems to me, just from a mechanical standpoint to protect your investment. So you've got some issues there that, are going to be tough hurdles to get over for all of us.
And this, to Ben's point on the what, as we were kind of trying to find an explanation for this. I mean, as we look at the rainfalls, we had 1/3 of an inch in April compared to 2 inches last April. So that might explain a little bit of it.
Sure.
Oh, I think it explains a lot of it,
Yeah.
Ben. I mean, I'm letting my grass go. I've capped off all my sprinklers, and it's hard to watch them die. I mean, I don't have great love for my grass, but just watching it, it's not pretty. It's looks like a dry field. So I can understand that, and we have a reasonably small front yard and a reasonably good sized backyard. So one, you can see every time you come in the door, so it's a little tricky. It's going to take time for people to adjust to, you want plants or water.
We've commented several times, the messaging is evolutionary. It builds on itself.
Yes.
Are
And
we able to?
probably Darwinian too.
Yeah.
Are we able to get flume data? Is that because I see we have AMI data? Are we able to get flume data included in our real-time information?
Harry, can you speak to that? I thought I saw her on here.
She
I
was.
think she was on. She probably dropped off.
Oh, right. She was on for the budget.
I don't see any way to
get
get it, Ben, unless you put the data in, unless the user puts the data in.
No, I believe, but we'll come back and clarify this issue that the flume meters that are done as part of the rebate, we do ask for access to that data. as the board knows, there's quite a number of flue meters that were put in outside of our rebate program, and I don't believe we have any way to access that information, but we'll come back with more details.
Okay, that would be great. I installed my flue meter and I've been digging, watching all the data every day, like when everything kicks on or turns off or the showers. I'm like, it's phenomenal. I mean, I'm a scientist by trade, so I like this stuff anyway, but I think it's extremely powerful.
Well, and you know, Monty, it's mechanical, huh? It's a positive displacement meter out there. So if the water goes past it, it records it.
Yeah, I mean, it was so I'll do like a post that I'll do on social media. It was so remarkably easy to set up, and it's so fascinating to watch, and so informative, that I just wonder to what extent we can track the conservation benefit of when people get these things, how much it translates into a change in their usage. Because I would wonder if that isn't, for the costs, it could be potentially one of the best bangs for our buck. But
there's no question about that. You know, you can't, I've been harping on this for 16, 17 years, that you can't expect people to respond if you don't give them the data. You know, I mean, you know, you can sit there and wish and hope, and you're probably too young, Monty, to remember the gigantic cell phone bills, but I use that analogy because it's exactly the same, that you used to get these horrendous cell phone bills, like $3,000. And, you know, and even the phone bills, it's all after the fact, huh? You know, you've already done it. So you get this huge thank you at the end of the time, but it doesn't help you to conserve while you're there, huh? So that, yeah, if we tie people's hands behind their back, you can't expect them to do good work.
All right, so would the board like to move to expenditures?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So here's your breakdown of expenditures. Again, your benchmark of about 83%. So these are major objects. We're looking at personnel services, salary, wages, and PERS and all the benefits that go along with that. So there were about 76% of budget through April. Maintenance operating expenses were 87.4%. And then our financing costs are dead on. The only reason that's dead on is because we take those biannual payments and we just smooth them out over the 12 months. And then the capital allocations run about 80%, so pretty close to budget there for that portion that we move over to capital assets from operating. So total operating expenses for 80%, running pretty close to budget there. Any benefit that we're getting there is because we're a little bit behind on personnel services, likely due to just vacancies. And then fire flow projects were about 40%, and then district projects that are the capital projects and capital equipment purchases were about 45%. But as I'll show you here in a moment, once we throw encumbrances in, that number changes quite substantially. So if we look at the total expenditures, just off what we booked, that's 70%. But then when we break this down and add in these encumbrances, so those are things that we know we've contracted for, but maybe that we haven't received yet. That's $9.6 million. So when you add that in, you come out to about 78% of budget. So again, tracking very close to an 83% linear budget. And then we all show the board the ending fund balances here. So the restricted and designated fund balances contain things like workers' comp, general liability, and those kind of costs that we put in there at $21.8 million. Rate stabilization and the pension reserves here have stayed stable at $9.4 and $2 million respectively. The fire flow fund is growing. It was $2 million at June 30th, and now we're at $3.8 million. And then the capital fund, which by policy we maintain 1 year's worth of capital expenses in there is $24.4 million. And then the operating unrestricted fund has ticked up by about $5 million since June 30th. We're at $31.5 million, which puts us where we were last month when we showed the board the March numbers. We're at at 5.3 of operating budget balance to budget in months. And, you know, our policy, which is kind of aspirational, is 6 months, and we're actually getting pretty close to that. However, I think some things that we book at year end, like bad debt, will probably reduce this a bit. But I mean, we look very healthy here at 5.3 right now. Debt service coverage is 3.0. Outstanding bonded debt is $142 million. So that's primarily those three major issues that we have outstanding and are paying down year by year. And then the other debts, just smaller debts that we have out there, like with Fiscal and sanitary. Those are also being paid down year by year. So we're actually looking pretty healthy in our fund balances, which we will likely be looking at as we enter into the drought and have to address some of the challenges that we have on the financial side. And then we've been just showing the cumulative effect of the financial impacts from COVID-19. So we've expended about $550,000. A lot of that is in the deep spray of $211,000, and then sick leave of $203,000 is where the preponderance of that is. And we have some other categories here that make up the balance of that. So overall, what we're showing you is that, you know, generally, if we look at that linear benchmark, we're really tracking really well with revenues and expenditures with the budget. So far, we're not seeing any ill effects. Our fund balances, as I showed you, we look healthy. We've got that 5.3 in months of available undesignated balance, and that's a really good metric. And then COVID, while it's been a major impact from a financial standpoint for the district, it's been a relatively minor impact. And again, that COVID number is cumulative all the way back to last March. So that is that's my presentation for the financial report, and we can field any questions. I also am joined by Nick Young here, who puts a lot of this together and does a lot of hard work on this.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. Great, really helpful and very clear presentation. Any board comments on this item?
Nope.
Okay. Terry, do we have any public comments on this item?
There are none.
Okay, then I think, unless there's anything else, Ben, I think we are adjourned.
We're good.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.